Jim Borel is Executive Vice President and a member of DuPont's Office of the Chief Executive. He is responsible for DuPont's agriculture and nutrition businesses. Jim is chair of the National 4-H Council's Board of Trustees and serves on the boards of CropLife International, the Farm Foundation, and the trustees of the University of Delaware. DuPont has taken a leadership role in achieving the mission of global food security. The organization recently commissioned the Global Food Security Index, developed by the Economist Intelligence Unit, which measures the drivers of food security in over 105 countries around the world. This tool, which many of you will experience in a workshop later today, provides clear metrics and a common language for discussing and determining the root causes of hunger around the world. Please enjoy the following video that DuPont has prepared for the participants of the forum. At its conclusion, please help me to welcome Jim Borel as our opening keynote speaker for today's session. Thank you.
And feed the world?
I will make a difference to feed the world.
How will I make a difference to help feed the world?
I thought about that question a lot.
Addressing the problem of hunger is going to require an interdisciplinary approach.
I will become a 7th generation Iowa farmer.
Making scientific knowledge more accessible and understandable.
I'm dedicated to working with pork producers to raise safe, high-quality food products.
Sharing my time, my knowledge, my skills, and my resources.
This is a generation that wants to change the world. Working to resolve hunger is one way to do that.
Good morning. I'm pleased to be here in Atlanta to join the International Food and Agribusiness Management Association Conference. Special thanks to Mary Shellman and her leadership team at IFAMA for the opportunity. Also, many thanks to the young leaders that were featured in the video that you just saw. You know, those students, like many of you here today, are asking themselves important questions, like, what will I do to help feed the world? And to everybody, as you participate in the conference, I'd ask you to consider what you can do to support not only today's scientists and farmers and leaders, but tomorrow's. The unprecedented task that we face depends as much on those outside of agriculture and on the next generation as it does on all of you. As the video just alluded to, young adults, and those people all over the world are considering the ways in which they can lend their talents and their passion to fight against hunger. So before I begin, let me thank the students in the room for your passion and your commitment to agriculture. You are the next generation of leaders in food and agriculture, and leadership is something that is going to be urgently and greatly needed in the years ahead. I say this because we're facing an unprecedented task. While tackling food security around the world can be daunting and sometimes unsettling, I remain optimistic. I believe that science can provide the answers that we need to ensure a viable and sustainable food supply, despite the increased pressure from pests and climate change. Nobody likes hunger. We all want to be fed. And today I'd like to talk to you about the extraordinary challenge that we face and the responsibility that we all have to help solve it. But I want to start my talk in a very ordinary place and ask you to imagine a very ordinary experience, a trip to a European market. If you're an American like me, you can't help but notice the subtle differences in how people shop and buy food around the world. I had the great fortune to work in many parts of Europe and Asia, and I can appreciate the differences in food availability and in selection. In the United States, we have large supermarkets. They offer tremendous variety. The average U.S. market stocks over 38,000 items, and they offer great convenience. The basic fact is that across Europe and North America and several parts of Asia, food, all kinds of food, are abundantly available at almost any time. And most fundamentally important, the typical citizen To them, food actually costs very little. On average, we spend less than 10% of our disposable income on food. With the impact of the Green Revolution after 1970 and lasting up until 2005, the real price of staple crops like rice and wheat and maize has actually been falling year after year. We've become incredibly efficient at growing and producing food. People in the economically advanced nations are not just fed, we're well fed. Although even within our own borders, we occasionally suffer from disproportionate access. But because food is so abundant and so inexpensive, most Americans don't think anything of making multiple trips to the grocery store, and many families often buy in bulk. But now let's travel to another part of the world, perhaps Ethiopia. And imagine that you and your family want to eat bread. There's one choice in Ethiopia. It's called injera. Before you make your purchase, you remember there's been a drought. Grain is in short supply. The price of oil has spiked to $120 a barrel. There's been hoarding of food. The public policies in place have actually magnified the issues. So the cost of your daily staple has doubled. However, unlike Europe and America, you don't spend 10% of your income on food. You spend about 80%. And you've just discovered that you can no longer feed your family. Imagine how you would react. But here's the important thing. You don't really have to imagine, because this is exactly what happened a few years ago in 2008. There was widespread famine, there were riots, and this is a challenge that we're going to continue to face in the future. I've been fortunate to spend my days engaged in agriculture that I like to call the optimistic science. In fact, I've spent my life working to ensure there was enough food on our plates. As a farm kid, I baled hay, I raised cattle in 4-H, I did the other chores that were typical on a Midwestern Iowa family farm. And today I have the opportunity to work for one of the world's leading companies that focuses on ensuring that there's enough nutritious, safe food for billions of families to eat around the world. And I've been privileged to talk to farming families in China and India and Malawi and Brazil, literally around the world, about their aspirations and about their challenges. And as I've worked around the world, I've discovered something important. Crops vary, climate varies, the languages are different, there's an abundance of different types of food that are grown, but yet across cultures, the pillars of farming families are the same. There's a shared set of values that unites us. There's a creed, it seems, of farm families everywhere. Farmers share a love of the land and a respect for nature gained by close contact with it every day. Farmers want to improve the quality of life for themselves and their families, and they work very hard to make that happen. Farmers take big risks every year, literally betting the farm, knowing that the end result is not in their control, but still trusting in the best. And farmers share a sense of community, of the land and the people and their place. And finally, farmers know that what they do is more than simply worthwhile. It's vitally important. From farmers in countries around the world, I've heard and seen firsthand the enormous challenge we face as a planet in the coming decades, and it's a challenge that we must attend to. It's also a challenge that I believe we can rise to meet, but not by doing business as usual, not by looking the other way or letting someone else lead the way, and certainly not by working alone. We must face this challenge together. And I'd like to spend the next few minutes talking about food security and what I think we're going to need to do, working together over the coming years. You know, this year, last year, and really for many years now, the world has grown more than enough food to feed the entire population. In 1996, the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization estimated that the world was producing enough food to provide every man, woman, and child with 2,700 calories per day, which is actually about 600 calories more than is actually needed. If you take all the food that farmers produce around the world, that they're growing right now, we're actually producing more than twice the number of minimum calories required. Then why are so many people hungry? We have to ask this question, particularly today when we've recently passed the number of 7 billion inhabitants on the planet, and the numbers are all pointing in the next 40 years to exceeding 9 billion. Even in the United States, for instance, over the last year, a land of enormous agricultural productivity, statistics say that at least 1 in 7 people suffered some form of food insecurity. And I'll be the first to admit that when food is easy to take for granted, when it's abundantly available and readily accessible. But we can no longer ignore reality. This is not a problem that others need to be concerned about. Global food security affects us all. Just a few generations from now, when our grandchildren or great-grandchildren are born, demographers predict that 9 billion people will live on Earth. And because of steadily rising urbanization, 70% will live in cities. And in order to truly address the challenge of hunger, of food availability and access, of agricultural productivity, of trade policy and transparency, it'll take the collective efforts of all of us. Because in the past, we've failed as often as we've succeeded. Fundamentally, there are 4 key areas that we need to make significant advances in if we're to feed the people here in the U.S. and around the world over the next 40 years. First, science is universal, but solutions must be local. We know that science can provide universal answers, but we need to find local solutions. We need to assure that the best minds and the brightest thinkers of the next generation are fully engaged in addressing food security locally. From science and technology, transportation and logistics, government and regulatory policy. We need innovators like many of you in the room here today working together to address local challenges that result in hunger. And most people, if you ask them to describe an exciting, world-changing piece of technology, they'll hold up their iPhone. But I'll tell you this, there's as much technology and there's even more human ingenuity in a modern kernel of seed corn. And that corn has something that no iPhone will ever possess. It has hope. It can feed the world. It can bring millions out of poverty. It can create a better world for all of us. I believe there is so much need for creativity and as much room for startling, world-changing innovation in how we feed the world as there ever could be in the digital world. Food is the great challenge of the 21st century. And make no mistake about it, good ideas and useful innovations travel at the speed of human enthusiasm. We need bright young people to understand how much they can contribute and how rewarding it can be. We need a new generation of food visionaries who can see the tremendous opportunity made possible by the simple fact that we all need to eat. Food needs to be grown locally, but we also have to keep in mind that we don't live in a perfectly ordered world. We have some spots on the planet, like Iowa, where I grew up, where they're agriculturally rich, but a relatively low population. And there are other areas with very high populations and poorly productive farmland. And what we need to do is, this is where I foresee the best and the brightest minds of today helping to bring fresh ideas and approaches, is to create a globally integrated food system that's efficient, transparent, barrier-free, and consistent across borders and cultures. The second area that needs our attention is ensuring that science becomes local wisdom. Know-how has to be brought to the people and the places that need it most. In parts of Africa, for example, or elsewhere in the world, smallholder farmers are working in using the same planting methods that they've used for thousands of years. We need to ensure that farmers in developed and developing countries alike have access to advanced seeds and the know-how and the tools needed to improve productivity in their farming operations. And for these farmers, the increased harvest means improved lives for their family and their community. So the first area is local solutions, and including engaging young innovators. The second is local wisdom or know-how. And now the third, and this probably won't come as any surprise when you think about it, is sustainability. In the truest sense of the word, solutions to feed a growing population need to be sustainable economically and socially, as well as environmentally. We need to evaluate the most sustainable methods to grow food where it's needed most and to make sure that it gets to where it's ultimately needed. Many people are surprised to know that today, despite the massive agricultural trade in the world, 85% of our food never crosses an international border. We need to improve the overall sustainability of food, how it and where it's produced, how it gets on our plates, and how much of it's wasted. I believe we can do this. For a start, DuPont's investing in new crop protection products that continuously raise the standards of environmental safety and user safety. To ensure a bountiful harvest, farmers need to protect their crops from pests and weeds. And the next step is helping them take that harvest to market, because if we only focus on what goes on in the field, if we only focus on what goes on in the field, we leave off a big part of the food security equation, and that's food waste. When I tell people that about a third of agricultural production around the world or in developing countries is lost to waste, they nod knowingly. You can see in their mind's eye the piles of grain where silos aren't available, or where transport systems are slow or inefficient and frequently mismanaged. But when I asked what they would say that number would be in developed countries, they would guess something like 5 or 10%. And many are surprised to find out that, no, the number is actually about the same. We waste about a third of the food in the US and Western Europe as well, but not primarily from the farm to the market, but instead from the market to our plates. It's the waste you see when you only eat half of the restaurant's portion and the rest is thrown away, or when packaged food moves past its sell-by date. It's the waste we all find in the back of our refrigerators when the food we've purchased is still there and never was managed to be consumed. Now, we'll probably never completely eliminate that waste, but if we can find ways to reduce it significantly, we can go a long ways toward ensuring ourselves that we can feed the 9 billion people that are going to be here 40 years from now. On a recent trip to Africa, my host took me out in the countryside. We went down a paved country road that eventually turned to a gravel road and then turned into a very rough pathway. We were way back in the countryside, and there I met a young woman running a small farm. She had 6 milk cows. She also had an all-terrain vehicle, which was very unusual, and she was able to use that vehicle to transport her milk, her fresh milk, to the dairy co-op, which was about 20 kilometers away, twice every day. She had no refrigeration, and you can imagine in the heat of the tropics, the time between milking and getting the milk into properly cooled storage is critical. If she's delayed, if she doesn't get there in time, her milk will spoil and the co-op will refuse it. That's what waste looks like in developing nations. Now, the exciting thing to me is that DuPont scientists have identified a natural culture that can preserve and stabilize raw milk, extend its shelf life for 8 and hopefully up to 12 hours. That may not sound like a lot of time to you or I, but to this young woman, that difference can mean the difference between making 2 trips to the co-op each day or only 1 trip. And it can mean the difference between arriving with a product that can be sold or one that simply has to be poured out on the ground. In the life of this dairy farmer, that difference is enormous. Today, approximately a third to half of the fresh milk produced by smallholder farmers in Kenya goes to waste. And through this application of enzyme technology that can slow the onset of microbial spoilage, making the evening milk suitable to go in with the morning milk and then be sold and consumed instead of being wasted, it can make a real difference. Science is universal, but solutions are local. Here's an opportunity where the right science can make a huge improvement in the lives of families around the world. And we believe that there are many other similar opportunities just awaiting one of you to ask the right question and then apply the right science to help us find the answer. The fourth point is that feeding a growing world will require a new kind of collaboration across sectors and time zones and languages and industries. Indeed, collaboration unlocks the answers that science can provide. Solutions have to be collaborative, reached in concert with communities, with governments, with NGOs who know the facts on the ground, with business entities that have specialized expertise to solve particular problems. No one country, company, NGO can solve world hunger alone. It's going to take all of us working together and creating new kinds of collaborations. I believe agriculture, as I said, is an optimistic science, and I believe there is recent tangible momentum between private and public entities to collaborate on projects related to research, infrastructure, financing, public health, and more to help us address food security around the world. At DuPont, we invest over $2 billion in research and development, and over close to 2/3 of that is aimed at agriculture and food. We consider that a start. It's not an end point. After careful review and hearing the input of some of the world's leading scientists and policy experts, we've made some bold commitments in joining with others to help address this challenge. During the next 10 years, DuPont has committed resources, investment, and ingenuity to help the world meet the challenge of global food security, here in the U.S. as well as around the world. In that time, we've committed to invest at least $10 billion in research and development aimed at agriculture and food, and introduce at least 4,000 new products that are designed to enhance nutrition, improve sustainability and safety of food, boost food production and availability, and to reduce waste. Moreover, because we recognize that the quality of the solutions are only going to be as good as the people who propose them and implement them, we'll make a concerted effort to engage and educate youth around the world, bringing them in as future partners in what will be an exciting and rewarding international effort. We need to be sure that as we're creating educational opportunities for them and others, that will help give them the knowledge and the ability to create targeted, customized solutions for farmers around the world. And finally, because so much of the immediate and long-term need is going to revolve around empowering and improving the lives of smallholder farmers, we'll utilize DuPont's global footprint and empower our employees to work with local communities to improve the livelihoods of at least 3 million smallholder farmers around the world by 2020. So, as we've talked with governments and NGOs and farmer organizations around the world, we've come to realize that while we share common goals, we don't share a common language about how we can approach food security. To really understand the root causes and the challenge that food security poses, common food security metrics are going to be key to increasing global food security. So as part of our continued commitment, DuPont commissioned the development of a comprehensive measurement tool that addresses the need for specific metrics to illustrate what food security looks like country by country around the world. The Global Food Security Index, developed by the Economist Intelligence Unit and commissioned by DuPont, is the first of a kind dynamic scoring tool that measures the drivers of food securities in over 105 countries around the world. The Economist Intelligence Unit will host a workshop on the Global Food Security Index this afternoon, so I hope many of you will be able to attend. So as we look to the future, I encourage you all to ask yourself some tough questions. If you're a scientist, what innovation are you going to create that can improve the livelihoods of smallholder farmers? If you're a policymaker, what policies will you work to implement that will support the tie between agricultural growth and economic vitality around the world? What policy will best enable free and open trade of commodities to get food from where it can be best produced to where it's needed most? If you're an entrepreneur, what innovation are you going to work on to most improve the livelihoods and productivity of farmers here and around the world? And as we work together and invite others, including the next generation, to join us, what role will you be playing? By your actions, large and small, by way of your enthusiasm, that's what sparks the interest of another young professional in agriculture. By the uncommon way you do things, you can make a real difference in the world. For the leaders in this room, listen to the issues outlined today, and I'd ask you to make a personal commitment to engage the next generation, because regardless of the specific challenge we face, solving it requires their commitment. And to the young leaders, consider how you'll get involved, and then take action. Make your commitment known, because when you do, it inspires others. Like the young leaders in the video, we want you to tell your story, because together, I know we can feed the world. Thank you.